She laughed at his laptop in front of 400 people. He said nothing. He just opened it. 48 minutes later, every screen in that building turned red, and the most powerful CEO in the room was begging the man she'd just humiliated to save her company. But here's what nobody in that room knew yet. The technology she was standing on that stage bragging about, he built it. Drop a comment below and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button. You do not want to miss where this one goes. The laughter started before he even reached the registration table. Nathan Brooks heard it the way you hear thunder before a storm. Distant at first, then closer, then impossible to ignore. He was used to it by now. Or at least that's what he told himself on mornings like this one, when he'd been up since 5. Made Lily's lunch, checked her backpack twice, dropped her at school with a kiss on the forehead, and a promise he intended to keep, and then driven 40 minutes through Manhattan traffic to stand in a lobby full of people who wore their net worth on their wrists. He adjusted the strap of his laptop bag and kept walking. The Meridian Convention Center was the kind of place that made a certain type of person feel powerful just by existing inside it. 40-foot ceilings, glass walls that reflected the skyline, a registration desk staffed by people in matching blazers who smiled the way expensive hotels trained their concierge staff to smile bright, smooth, and just slightly above you. Nathan handed over his credentials. The registration woman, young, polished a headset curled behind one ear, glanced at his name, glanced at his bag, and then looked back at her screen with an expression that said everything her mouth didn't. "Nathan Brooks," she said. "General admission." "That's right." She handed him a lanyard. Plain white. No colored border. No VIP stripe. Just a name on a card in a plastic sleeve. He put it on and walked toward the main hall. But the Tech Forward Summit happened every year, and every year it got bigger, louder, and more expensive. This year, Bennett Dynamics had bought the title sponsorship, which meant Olivia Bennett's face was on every banner, every digital display, every promotional screen, from the lobby to the main stage. She was 41 founder and CEO, the kind of woman whose biography read like a highlight reel. Harvard MBA, 2 successful exits before 35, named to Forbes' list 3 years running, and now standing on the verge of launching what her marketing team called the most significant AI infrastructure platform in the last decade. Nathan had read the press release. He'd read the technical white papers too, which was more than most people in this building had done. He found a seat near the back of the main hall, not because he was shy, but because the back gave him a clear sightline to the stage and the exits, and more importantly, to the technical monitoring terminals mounted along the side wall. Those terminals were connected to the live system feed. He'd been told which ones to watch. His bag went under his seat. He unzipped it and pulled out the laptop. It was a ThinkPad. 11 years old. The lid had a crack running from the upper right corner down toward the hinge, repaired with a strip of industrial tape that had gone gray at the edges. One of the rubber feet was missing. The charging port was slightly loose, so you had to angle the cable just right or it wouldn't connect. The trackpad had a dead zone in the lower left corner. He opened it and powered it on. The man sitting next to him, 50s sport coat, the kind of conference lanyard with a gold border that meant he'd paid $4,000 for a VIP pass, glanced over. "That thing's still running," he said. Nathan looked up. "Just fine," he said. The man smiled the way people smile when they're being polite about something they find amusing, and turned back toward the stage. Nathan had been in technology for 23 years. But he'd started in the mid-90s writing network security protocols for a defense contractor in Virginia, back when most companies were still figuring out what the internet was. He'd spent his 30s building authentication systems for 3 different firms, 2 of which had been acquired for numbers that made headlines. He hadn't gotten rich off either one. He'd been a contractor both times, not an equity holder, but the work had been good, and the problems had been interesting, and for a while that had been enough. Then Susan got sick. That was 6 years ago now. Lily had been born healthy, small, loud, perfect, and Susan had spent 18 months fighting something that had no intention of losing. Nathan had watched her fight it anyway, the way she fought everything, with a stubbornness that was almost beautiful to witness, even when it broke your heart. She lost in February, 3 weeks before Lily turned 2. February 3. Nathan had taken Lily back to New York, found a small apartment in Queens, and spent the next 4 years doing contract work wherever he could find it remote, mostly enough to keep the lights on, and Lily fed, and the after-school program paid for. He wasn't broke. He wasn't thriving either. He was somewhere in the middle, which was where most people actually lived, even if conference halls like this one were designed to make you forget that. He hadn't come today for a job. He'd come because of Marcus Webb. Marcus had texted him 11 days ago. Nathan, you need to look at something. BD architecture. I found a problem and I can't get anyone to listen to me internally. You're the only person I trust on this. Marcus Webb was one of the best infrastructure engineers Nathan had ever worked with. They'd collaborated on a security project 7 years ago, the kind of project Nathan still couldn't talk about in detail, and Marcus had since moved into a senior engineering role at Bennett Dynamics. He was meticulous paranoid in the way that good security engineers tended to be paranoid and not prone to exaggeration. If Marcus said there was a problem, there was a problem. Nathan had reviewed what Marcus sent him over the following week. It was dense, layered API documentation, authentication flow diagrams, internal log extracts that Marcus had pulled during his own diagnostic work. Nathan had stayed up until 2 in the morning 3 nights in a row going through it. By the end of the week, he wasn't just concerned. He was genuinely alarmed. He was genuinely. The flaw wasn't obvious. That was the most dangerous thing about it. If you looked at any single component of Bennett Dynamics' new platform, it looked clean. The encryption was solid. The access controls were properly tiered. The public-facing infrastructure was locked down tight, and whoever had built it knew what they were doing. But there was a seam. Boom. A single diagnostic endpoint. A legacy pathway, the kind that gets left in systems during development and is supposed to be removed before deployment had been misconfigured. The authentication token that governed it was valid across multiple service contexts, which meant that under the right conditions, with the right sequence of calls, you could leverage that token to access infrastructure it was never supposed to touch. It wasn't a backdoor. It was more like a window that had been nailed shut from the outside, but left unlocked from the inside. And tonight, in front of 400 people, Bennett Dynamics was about to do a live demonstration of their platform. Nathan had come because Marcus couldn't be at the conference. He'd been pulled into an internal briefing that morning, something last minute, and he'd texted Nathan in a panic at 7 a.m. They won't delay the demo. I've raised this 3 times and been told it's not critical. Nathan, if something happens during a live demo in front of that crowd, I'll be there. Nathan had written back. Lily. She's at school. I'll be back to pick her up at 3. There's time. The lights dimmed at 9:45. The crowd shifted and settled the way crowds do when something they've been anticipating is finally about to happen. Phones came out. Cameras angled toward the stage. The man in the sport coat beside Nathan leaned forward slightly. And Olivia Bennett walked out. She was good at this. That was the honest thing to admit. She moved like someone who had been comfortable in front of crowds her entire life. No hesitation, no adjustment period, just presence. She wore a dark blazer over a white shirt, minimal jewelry, the kind of understated expensive that took real money to achieve. She smiled at the audience like she was genuinely glad to see them, and the applause she got suggested the feeling was mutual. "Good morning," she said, and her voice carried easily without the microphone before she reached up and touched the lapel clip. "I'm not going to bore you with slides." Laughter. "I'm going to show you something real." More applause. And Nathan opened his laptop and connected to the conference's guest network. He pulled up the monitoring interface Marcus had set up for him, a custom dashboard that gave him a read on the system's live authentication logs, not the sanitized version the company was displaying on the main screens, but the raw feed. He started watching. Olivia talked for 12 minutes before the live demonstration began. She was compelling. Nathan would give her that. She knew how to translate technical complexity into language that made non-technical people feel like they understood it, which was a skill rarer than most engineers wanted to admit. She talked about the platform's architecture in broad strokes: distributed processing, real-time adaptive security, a proprietary AI layer that monitored and responded to threats faster than any human team could. "We didn't just build something fast," she said, pausing for effect. "We built something that thinks." Nathan was watching the logs. At first, everything looked normal. The system was running clean authentication requests, moving through proper channels, tokens, validating correctly, nothing unusual in the handshake patterns. Then at minute 14 of the demonstration he saw it. A single anomalous entry in the diagnostic layer. Tiny. The kind of thing you'd scroll past if you weren't specifically looking for it. An authentication token being called in a context where it shouldn't have access, not an intrusion, not yet just a pattern, the system doing exactly what the misconfiguration allowed it to do, referencing itself in a loop that created a brief open window in the access hierarchy. It lasted 4 seconds. Then it closed. Nathan stared at the log entry. Then he stared at it again. His hands went very still on the keyboard. The window was closing and reopening, he realized, on a cycle. Every time the demonstration triggered a certain sequence of API calls, which the live demo was doing repeatedly by design to show the system's capabilities, the window opened. 4 seconds, then closed. Then 60 to 90 seconds later, depending on load, opened again. It was a timer. An unintentional one built into the system's own demonstration routine. And if someone outside the network was watching the same logs, or if they'd already mapped the endpoint and were waiting for the pattern, they had everything they needed. Nathan closed his monitoring dashboard and opened a different tool. Something he'd written himself, a lightweight diagnostic script he'd been using since his defense contractor days, updated and modified over the years until it fit in about 40 lines of code. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't designed to access anything it wasn't supposed to access. It was the equivalent of a doctor pressing on a bruise to confirm where it hurt. He looked at the stage. Olivia was mid-sentence describing the platform's redundancy architecture. Nathan looked at the sidewall, where 2 of Bennett Dynamics' technical staff were standing near the monitoring terminals. Young guys, early 30s, polo shirts with the company logo. The kind of self-assurance that came from working at a company that had been celebrated too much, too early. He picked up his credentials badge and walked over. "Excuse me," Nathan said. The taller one turned. His badge said Kyle Senior Infrastructure. "I've been reviewing the live logs on the guest interface," Nathan said, keeping his voice low. "There's an authentication anomaly in your diagnostic layer. Token ID." He glanced at his phone, where he'd screenshotted the log entry. "Looks like a legacy endpoint left active from development. It's cycling open on a 60 to 90 second interval tied to the demo's API call sequence." Kyle looked at him, then at his badge, then at his laptop bag. "Your general admission," Kyle said. "Yes?" "So you're watching the guest-facing monitoring interface?" "Correct." "Which doesn't give you access to internal authentication logs?" "I had access through a colleague who works here, Marcus Webb. He set up a read-only feed for..." "Marcus is in an internal briefing." "I know that. That's why I'm talking to you." Kyle looked at the other tech whose badge said Devon. Some kind of silent conversation passed between them. "Sir," Devon said with the careful neutrality of someone who'd been trained in de-escalation, The internal systems are monitored by our security operations team in real time. If there were an issue of the nature you're describing, they would have flagged it. With respect, Nathan said, the issue is subtle enough that it might not trigger a standard alert threshold. The window is only 4 seconds per cycle. But the token— We appreciate your concern, Kyle said, and his tone had shifted into something flatter and more final. Enjoy the presentation. Nathan stood there for a moment. He'd spent enough years in rooms like this to know that look. It wasn't hostility exactly. It was dismissal, the specific variety that came from being certain you were right without having actually checked whether you were. Kyle wasn't a bad engineer. Devin probably wasn't either. They were just operating from the assumption that someone who looked like Nathan at an event like this, raising a concern like this, was probably wrong. He walked back to his seat. He sat down. He opened his laptop. The log was still running. The window had just closed again. He watched the counter. 51 seconds. He thought about Lily. He thought about the promise he'd made that morning. I'll pick you up at 3. Sweetheart, I promise. And the way she'd looked up at him with those serious brown eyes that looked so much like her mother's, it sometimes stopped him cold and said, You always come, Daddy. Not I know you will. Just you always come. Like it was a fact about the world she'd already decided was true. He looked at the stage. He looked at the logs. He thought about what would happen if an external attacker found that window during a live national broadcast, because that's what this effectively was with the media presence in the room, and used it, and the breach went public, and 400 investors watched Bennett Dynamics' flagship platform compromised in real time. Toys. The damage wouldn't just be to the company. The authentication framework at the core of this platform had dependencies he recognized. He'd spent the last week tracing them. The architecture referenced protocols he knew, not because they were common, but because he had written some of them. If an attacker found the right thread to pull, the exposure could extend beyond Bennett Dynamics' own infrastructure into interconnected systems that had nothing to do with this conference or this company. He checked the counter. 38 seconds. Nathan looked around the room once more. The investors with their gold lanyards. The journalists with their phones raised Olivia Bennett on stage, talking about the future of security, while a vulnerability sat open in her system like an unlocked window on the 42nd floor. He made a decision. Not because he wanted to make a scene. Not because he wanted to prove something to Kyle or Devin or anyone else in the room. He made it because it was the right thing to do, and because he had spent the last 4 years learning that nobody else was going to do the right thing just because you wished they would. 22 seconds. He positioned his fingers over the keyboard. He ran the diagnostic script. 4 seconds later, every screen in the building turned red. The silence lasted less than 2 seconds. Then the room exploded. Not loudly. There was no shouting. Not at first. It was the silence of 400 people processing something unexpected simultaneously, a collective intake of breath that was almost physical. Every screen in the main hall, the presentation displays the side monitors. The sponsor banners that had been cycling through product graphics had shifted to the same image, a red background, and in white text, a security alert. Not a generic one. A real one. The diagnostic script had triggered the platform's own internal warning system, which meant the alert that appeared on every screen was formatted, labeled, and specific. Authentication. Vulnerability. Detected diagnostic endpoint exposure. Token cycling active. Olivia Bennett stopped speaking mid-sentence. Her mouth was still open. On the stage behind her, the demo system's main display showed the same red screen. For a moment, she just stood there, and Nathan could see her, even from the back of the room, running through the same sequence every leader runs through when something goes catastrophically wrong in public. Is this real? Is this mine? Is there any version of this that isn't what I think it is? There wasn't. Kyle was already moving toward the monitoring terminals. Devin had his phone out. 3 other technicians Nathan hadn't noticed before were converging from different corners of the room. Security staff, actual event, security not tech were scanning the crowd, hands moving toward radios. And then one of them pointed at Nathan. Because he was the only person in the back half of the room with an open laptop. They reached him in under 40 seconds. Kyle arrived first with Devin a step behind and a security guard flanking them. Kyle's face had gone from dismissive to rigid, the way faces do when something you were certain wasn't happening turns out to have been happening all along, and the certainty hasn't caught up with the evidence yet. "That was you," Kyle said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Nathan said. "You just executed an unauthorized intrusion on a live system. I ran a diagnostic tool on an exposed endpoint," Nathan said. "The endpoint was already open. I confirmed it was open. That's not intrusion. That's verification. You triggered a system-wide alert in front of 400 people. I triggered the system's own alert mechanism by accessing an endpoint that shouldn't have been accessible, which is exactly what I told you was going to happen 40 minutes ago." The guard put his hand on Nathan's arm. "Sir, I'm going to need you to come with Kyle." A voice from behind them, calm and precise and very clearly accustomed to being listened to. "Step back." Everyone stepped back. Olivia Bennett was standing 6 feet away. She'd come down from the stage. Nathan hadn't heard her move. She was looking at him, not at his laptop, not at his lanyard, not at the beat-up bag under his seat. At him. With an expression he couldn't quite read, somewhere between fury and something else that hadn't settled into a word yet. "Your name," she said. "Nathan Brooks." "What did you just do to my system, Nathan Brooks?" "I showed you what someone else was about to do to it," he said. "Except they wouldn't have just turned the screens red." A beat. "Who are you?" she said. It was the right question. It was just about 4 hours too late. The question hung in the air between them. Olivia Bennett was not a woman who asked questions she didn't expect answers to. Nathan had gathered that much from 12 minutes of watching her on stage. She was the kind of person who prepared, who anticipated, who walked into rooms having already decided how the next hour was going to go. The fact that she was standing here 6 feet from a man she'd never met, asking him who he was with something that looked almost like genuine uncertainty, that meant something. "Nathan Brooks," he said again. "I'm a security architect, independent contractor. I've been in infrastructure and authentication systems for about 23 years. Who do you work for?" "Right now. Nobody. I was asked to be here by Marcus Webb." Something moved across her face at the name. Not surprise exactly, but recognition, and beneath it, something tighter. "Marcus is in an internal briefing," she said. "I know. He texted me at 7 this morning because he couldn't get anyone to delay the demonstration. He's been trying to flag this vulnerability for over a week." The tightness in her expression got sharper. Kyle stepped forward. "Ms. Bennett, this individual executed an unauthorized—" "Kyle." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. "I heard you the first time. Go deal with the screens." Kyle hesitated for exactly 1 second, which was 1 second longer than was probably wise. Then he turned and walked back toward the monitoring terminals. Olivia looked at Nathan. "Walk with me," she said. They moved to the side corridor off the main hall where the ambient noise dropped enough that you could hear yourself think. 2 of her security detail followed at a distance. She didn't acknowledge them, and Nathan didn't either. "Talk to me about the vulnerability," she said. "Specifically, you have a legacy diagnostic endpoint left active in your production environment. It was probably used during the development and QA phase to run internal checks on your authentication layer. Standard practice. You need a pathway to test token validation without going through the full user-facing stack. The problem is, it wasn't decommissioned before deployment. That kind of thing gets caught in security review. Sure. Usually. But the reason it didn't get caught here is that the endpoint itself looks clean in isolation. The authentication token it uses is properly encrypted, properly scoped on paper. The misconfiguration isn't in the token, it's in the service context mapping. The token has inherited permissions across multiple service layers that were never intended to overlap because during development, those layers were kept separate. When you unified the architecture for production, the overlap got created without triggering any of your static analysis flags. Memed. She was quiet for a moment. And the cycling, she said. The demo routine you built for today calls a specific sequence of API endpoints in a loop I assume to show the platform's speed and responsiveness in real time. That sequence, by coincidence, includes a call pattern that activates the diagnostic pathway. Every 60 to 90 seconds, the window opens for 4 seconds. It's not random. It's baked into your own demonstration. 4 seconds isn't much of a window. 4 seconds is enough time to pass an authentication handshake if you already know where the door is, and the pattern is predictable once you've observed 2 or 3 cycles. An attacker with passive monitoring capability could map it in under 5 minutes. She stopped walking, turned and looked at him directly. You said someone was already probing it. During the time between when I flagged it to your technical team and when I ran the diagnostic, I saw 3 external authentication requests hit the endpoint from an IP range I didn't recognize. They weren't successful, the window wasn't open when they hit it. But the pattern of the requests was systematic, not a scan, someone looking for something specific. Someone who already knew about the endpoint, someone who at minimum suspected it existed. Whether they mapped it independently or had prior knowledge, I can't tell you. She was still looking at him. He had the feeling she was doing the same thing he did when he was reading a system log, not just processing the information, but tracing it backward, trying to understand how it got there. Why didn't you just contact the company directly? She said. Before today, through official channels. Marcus tried official channels for 8 days. He was told the concern wasn't critical. I was here today because this was the last opportunity to flag it before the live demonstration went out. And when my team dismissed you this morning, I tried twice, Kyle and Devin at the sidewall terminals about 40 minutes before I ran the diagnostic. Something happened in her expression that she controlled before it fully formed. He'd seen that before too, the look of a leader doing rapid triage on who knew what and when and what that meant about the decisions that had been made. They didn't tell me, she said. No. A long pause. You could have caused a panic, she said, doing it the way you did, in front of that crowd. There was already going to be a crisis, Nathan said. The choice wasn't between a crisis and no crisis. It was between a crisis that happened on our terms, in a controlled way, with the vulnerability exposed and fixable, or a crisis that happened on an attacker's terms with your platform, breached in front of 400 investors and a dozen journalists. She looked at him for another long moment. Then she said, "Come with me." The operations room was behind the main stage, a converted conference room that Bennett Dynamics had taken over for the event. 3 long tables, 8 monitors, a whiteboard covered in network diagrams, and 6 people who all looked up when Olivia walked in with a stranger she'd presumably just pulled off the convention floor. "This is Nathan Brooks," she said. "He's going to tell you what we're dealing with. Everyone listens." The room was quiet. Nathan set his laptop on the nearest table and opened it. He pulled up the log captures, the diagnostic data, the external request pattern he'd observed. He walked them through it, not quickly, not slowly, but at the pace he would have used with any technically competent team, which is to say, he didn't simplify and he didn't pad. He showed them the endpoint. He showed them the token context mapping. He showed them the cycling pattern and the timestamps of the external probes. When he finished, the room was still quiet. Then a woman at the far end of the table said, "I know this endpoint." Her name badge said, Priya Platform Architecture. She was leaning forward with both elbows on the table, and an expression that Nathan recognized immediately, the specific misery of an engineer who has just realized they built the thing that caused the problem. It was in the internal diagnostics suite from version 2.4, she said. We flagged it for removal in the pre-deployment checklist. I assumed. She stopped. What did you assume? Olivia said. I assumed it had been removed because it wasn't showing up on the active endpoint scan. But if the token's context permissions were creating a shadow reference, it wouldn't show on a standard active endpoint scan, Nathan said. Because technically the endpoint isn't active in the conventional sense. It's dormant until the right call sequence wakes it. Your scanner would have been looking for open ports and live responses. This one only responds under specific conditions. Priya closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds. Then she opened them and said, I need to pull the service layer config and the token permission map, right now. You'll need to look at the context inheritance table specifically, Nathan said. It's the overlap between the auth service and the diagnostic service that's creating the issue. If you can isolate those two layers and revoke the shared context permission on that token, you close the window. That's a live system change during an active demonstration. I know. If I do it wrong, I'll walk you through it. She looked at him. Then she looked at Olivia. Olivia said, do it. What followed was 41 minutes of the kind of work that nobody outside a small room would ever fully understand or appreciate, which was fine with Nathan, because he had never been in this business for the appreciation. He and Priya worked side by side, her fingers on the production console, his on his laptop, cross-referencing the permission tables and the service layer configuration in real time. She was good, genuinely good, the kind of engineer who had built something complex and understood every piece of it well enough to navigate it under pressure. She didn't argue with his assessments. She pushed back twice, both times on legitimate grounds, and both times they worked through it until they arrived at the same conclusion. The rest of the team worked around them. One engineer monitoring the external IP range Nathan had flagged, watching for additional probes. Another pulling the full authentication log from the last 72 hours to check for any prior access attempts they might have missed. Olivia stood at the back of the room, arms crossed, watching everything and saying very little, which Nathan had come to understand was her mode when she was thinking rather than performing. At one point, one of the external probes came back. They're hitting it again, the monitoring engineer said. Different IP, same range. They've changed the interval. They're varying the timing now, which means they've detected a pattern change in the system since your diagnostic. They know we're working on it, Nathan said. Can they accelerate? Olivia asked. They can try, but if Priya gets the context permission revoked before the next cycle opens. How long? Olivia asked Priya. Priya didn't look up. 6 minutes, maybe 5. The monitoring engineer said, next cycle window is in approximately 70 seconds based on the current demo sequence. Nathan looked at the service layer config on his screen. Skip the window, don't try to race it. Get the permission revoke staged correctly and deploy it between cycles. A mistake on a rush deploy is worse than one more open window. Priya nodded once sharply and kept working. 70 seconds came. The window opened. The external probe hit it a clean, fast authentication request. Well-structured, not a script kiddie scan. Whoever was on the other end of that connection knew exactly what they were doing. The request touched the endpoint and began the handshake sequence. And then Priya deployed the patch. The context permission revoked. The token's inherited access collapsed. The handshake died mid-sequence. On the monitoring screen, the external IP sat there for 8 seconds, making 2 more attempts, then went dark. The room let out a collective breath that nobody had acknowledged they'd been holding. Run the validation check, Nathan said. Priya ran it. Clean. Run it again. She ran it again. Still clean. She sat back in her chair and put both hands flat on the table and stared at the screen for a long moment. Then she looked at Nathan. It's closed, she said. Check the full endpoint inventory, Nathan said. Not just the diagnostic suite. Any endpoint that references the same auth service layer in a development context. If this one got through there, maybe others. That's a full audit. I know how long it takes. Start it now. She started it. Olivia walked over to where Nathan was standing and stopped beside him. She was looking at the monitoring screens, not at him. The demonstration is effectively over, she said. Yes. We've got 400 people in that hall who watched every screen turn red, heard no explanation, and have been sitting there for, she checked her watch, 53 minutes. That's a communications problem. You've got people who can handle that. What I'm going to tell them is that we identified and neutralized a security threat in real time, which is actually a better story than the demonstration we had planned. Nathan looked at her. If you want, she said, something careful in her voice, it could be a better story. Or it could be the story of a saboteur who disrupted a major product launch and caused a public incident. The room had gotten very quiet again. Nathan held her gaze. I documented everything before I ran the diagnostic. Timestamp's log captures the 2 conversations with your technical staff, the external probe activity. If there's a version of this where I'm the problem, instead of the person who identified the problem, that documentation is going to make for very interesting reading. A beat. Olivia said, I'm not threatening you. I know. I'm telling you that I have a choice to make about how I frame this to the people in that hall. And I'm telling you that I'm aware of what the right choice is. She stopped. Something crossed her face that was neither the performance nor the control, but something underneath both of them. I'm not accustomed to being on the wrong side of a situation like this. Nobody is, Nathan said. That's not the part that matters. What's the part that matters? Whether you do the right thing once you know you're on the wrong side. Another silence. Then she said, tell me something. The architecture. The foundational auth framework under this platform, do you recognize it? He paused for a fraction of a second before answering. Parts of it. Priya. Olivia didn't move, just raised her voice slightly. Pull the provenance documentation on the core authentication layer. The original development contracts. I want to know who designed the base framework. Priya looked up. That's going to be in the acquisition archive from... I know where it is. Pull it. Priya turned to her secondary monitor and started navigating. Nathan kept his expression neutral. But somewhere underneath the neutral in the place where he kept things, he'd stopped expecting anyone to acknowledge something shifted. Doug. He had built parts of that system. Not all of it. Other people had built on top of what he'd built, extended it, modified it, wrapped new architecture around the original core. That was how this industry worked. You wrote something, you moved on, and years later, your work was running inside something you'd never heard of, invisible and foundational and entirely uncredited. He'd known this day existed somewhere, the day when the thread would get traced back far enough to find him, and he'd spent enough time being practical about it that he thought he'd made peace with the fact that it probably never would. He watched Priya's screen. She found the file, opened it, read for about 15 seconds. Then she turned around and looked at Nathan with an expression he'd seen before, the look of an engineer who has just solved a problem they didn't realize they were trying to solve. The base authentication framework, she said slowly. The core token architecture that we built the whole platform on. She paused. It was designed under contract in 2018 by a security architect named... I know what it says, Nathan said quietly. The room was very still. Olivia turned and looked at him. Not at the laptop, not at the lanyard, not at the worn-out bag sitting under the table where he'd set it an hour ago. At him. You built it, she said. It wasn't a question this time either, but this time it landed differently. Parts of it, Nathan said. The token validation logic and the context hierarchy framework. 2018. I was on a 6-month contract. The company I was contracted through got acquired twice after that. You got paid for the contract. I got paid for the contract. That's how contracts work. You didn't get... She stopped herself, recalculated. You've known this entire time, while I was on that stage, while my team was dismissing you. Yes. And you said nothing. The vulnerability was the important thing. Who built what underneath it doesn't change whether the building is on fire. Olivia stood very still for a long time. When she finally moved, it was to pull out the chair next to Priya's station and sit down in it. Not the commanding, deliberate way she moved when she was performing leadership, but the way a person sits down when they genuinely need a moment. She put one hand flat on the table and looked at nothing in particular. The monitoring screens hummed. Priya's audit script ran. Somewhere in the main hall, 400 people were presumably still sitting in their seats, wondering what was going on. I laughed at your laptop, Olivia said. It was quiet, almost to herself. You did, Nathan said. In front of everyone. Yes. She looked up at him. What do you want from me? She said. Honestly, right now, what do you want? It was the second right question she'd asked him today. Nathan thought about Lily, about the drawing she'd been working on at breakfast, a house with a big tree in the yard and 2 people standing under it. About the way she'd handed it to him without a word, like she was giving him something she thought he needed, and how he'd folded it carefully and put it in the front pocket of his laptop bag where he kept the things that mattered. I want you to listen to your engineers, he said. Not the ones who tell you what you want to hear. The ones who tell you what you need to hear. That's all? That's everything. She was quiet again. Then she stood up. Priya, she said, finish the audit. I want a full report within the hour. She looked at the rest of the room. Nobody leaves until it's done. Then she looked at Nathan. And you? You're not leaving yet. I have to pick up my daughter at 3. It's 10:47. Then I have time, he said. And for the first time since she'd walked out on that stage, Olivia Bennett didn't look like the most powerful person in the room. She looked like someone who had a great deal of work ahead of her and had just enough honesty in her to know it. Which Nathan had learned over 23 years was the only thing that separated the leaders worth following from the ones worth running from. He pulled his laptop closer and went back to work. The audit took 94 minutes, and Nathan knew it would. A full endpoint inventory on a production system of that complexity wasn't something you rushed, and Priya wasn't the kind of engineer who cut corners when the stakes were this high. She worked methodically, systematically, the way Nathan had always worked, not fast, not slow, but right. He respected that. He stayed at the table beside her, not because she needed supervision, but because 4 sets of eyes on a problem like this were better than 2, and because nobody had asked him to leave. Olivia had disappeared back into the main hall about 20 minutes after their conversation. Nathan could hear muffled through the wall the sound of her voice addressing the crowd. Calm measured the performance gear back on. He caught fragments, identified in real time, proactively neutralized. Exactly the kind of scenario our platform was designed to handle. He had to give her credit. She was reframing a near disaster as a demonstration of competence, and she was doing it well enough that it might actually work. Whether it would hold once the journalists started pulling the thread was a different question. At 12:38, Priya leaned back in her chair and said, "That's the full inventory. The diagnostic endpoint was the only active misconfiguration. Everything else checks out." "Pull the legacy development endpoint specifically," Nathan said. "Any endpoint that was created before version 3.0 and retired rather than removed. That's going to widen the scope considerably." "I know." She looked at him. Then she ran the expanded query. It came back with 11 entries. 10 of them were genuinely clean, decommissioned, permission-revoked sitting dormant, without any pathway to activation. The 11th was borderline. Not dangerous on its own, but the kind of thing that accumulated risk over time, the kind of thing a careful attacker could potentially use as a pivot point if they found something else to chain it with. "Flag that one," Nathan said. "Not critical, but flag it for removal in the next maintenance window." Priya flagged it. "That's it," she said. "That's it." Nathan agreed. She turned in her chair and looked at him with the expression of someone who has been running hard and just crossed the finish line and hasn't quite caught their breath yet. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "The base framework, the token validation architecture. I've been working on top of it for 2 years and I never—" She shook her head. "I never traced back where it came from. That's on me. But the design decisions in it, some of them seemed almost counterintuitive at first, until I really understood the logic. The context hierarchy especially. I spent 3 weeks trying to understand why it was structured the way it was." "Did you figure it out?" "Eventually, but I had to build something similar from scratch, a test environment thing before it clicked." Sid Nathan nodded. "The context hierarchy was designed for a specific threat model. A federal system. The requirements were unusual. You had multiple security clearance levels that needed to be able to interact in constrained ways without ever fully merging. The hierarchy isn't intuitive if you're thinking about standard commercial applications, but for the environment it was built for, it's the right architecture." Then Priya was quiet for a moment. "And when Bennett Dynamics used it as a foundation for a commercial platform, some of the assumptions baked into the design don't apply anymore. Which is fine, as long as you know the assumptions are there. The problem is when you inherit an architecture without knowing its original context. You don't know what you don't know." "That's yeah." She was nodding slowly. "That actually explains 3 other things I've been puzzling over for months. Write them down. I'll walk you through the original design logic before I leave." She looked at him with an expression that was genuinely warm. "Thank you. Seriously." "You did the work?" Nathan said. "I just stood here." She laughed a short, tired laugh that was mostly relief. "You did a little more than stand here." The door opened and Olivia came back in. She'd been talking for 90 minutes, which meant she'd almost certainly run the event into an extended Q&A format buying time, giving the engineering team space to work, keeping 400 increasingly restless people engaged long enough that they didn't scatter into the lobby and start feeding their confusion to every journalist in the building. She looked at Priya first. "Clean. Clean. 1 flagged item for the maintenance queue, nothing critical. Full documentation will be ready within the hour." Olivia let out a breath so small and controlled you'd miss it if you weren't watching for it. "Good." She looked at Nathan. "I need 5 minutes." "Sure." They stepped back into the corridor. "The crowd is being held for a final statement," she said. "I want to give them a real account of what happened, not a spin, an honest account." "That's your call." "I know it's my call. I'm telling you what I've decided." She paused. "I want to acknowledge you specifically, by name. What you identified, what you did, and the fact that my team didn't listen to you when they should have." Nathan didn't respond immediately. "You don't have to," he said. "The important thing is that the system is secure." "The important thing," Olivia said with a deliberateness that told him she'd been thinking about this for longer than the last 5 minutes, "is that the next time someone like you tries to warn someone like Kyle listens. The only way that changes is if the behavior has consequences, public ones." He looked at her. "So yes," she continued, "I'm going to stand in front of 400 people and tell them that my team dismissed a legitimate security warning from an independent expert and that I'm accountable for the culture that made that dismissal possible." A pause. "I'm going to say it because it's true and because it needs to be said. But I also need to know before I do whether you're going to be standing in the hall or whether you're going to be in a car on the way to Queens. My daughter's school doesn't release until 3. Then you have time." He thought about it, not long, 3 or 4 seconds. Then he said, "I'll be in the hall." Something in her posture shifted barely perceptible, like something that had been braced against a weight that had just been put down. "There's something else," she said. "Okay. The contract work you did in 2018, the authentication framework." She stopped, chose her next words carefully. "Our legal team is going to have questions about provenance and attribution. I want to get ahead of that. Whatever conversation needs to happen, compensation credit however, that should have been structured, I want to have it properly." "You don't owe me anything for that work. I was paid under contract. That was the arrangement. The arrangement may have been legal without being correct." Nathan held her gaze. "Let your legal team look at it. If there's something that should be addressed, address it. I'm not asking for anything." "I know you're not," she said. "That's part of the problem." He didn't fully understand what she meant by that in the moment. He would think about it later, standing in Lily's school pickup line, turning it over in his mind. The problem wasn't that he was asking for too much. The problem was a world that had been calibrated to expect people like him to ask for nothing, and had organized itself around that expectation. "One more question," Olivia said. "Personal. You don't have to answer." "Okay. Your daughter, how old?" "6. Something moved through her expression. Not pity, closer to recognition. "You came here today knowing you might walk into a situation like this with a 6-year-old to pick up by 3. She's in school. She's fine. I'm not questioning your parenting. She paused. "I'm trying to understand who you are, because I spent this morning looking at your laptop and making assumptions, and all of those assumptions were wrong, and I'd rather not make the same mistake twice." Nathan was quiet for a moment. "I'm a person who does the work that needs doing," he said. "That's most of it. And the rest? The rest is just a father trying to get home on time." She nodded once slowly, like someone filing something in a place where it wouldn't get lost. Then she said, "Come back inside." The main hall was restless in the way that large crowds get when they've been waiting too long for something they don't fully understand. Nathan found a spot along the side wall, not at the back this time, but close to the monitoring terminals where Kyle and Devin were still stationed. Kyle saw him and held his gaze for a moment, not combative now, just complicated. Nathan gave him a small nod. Kyle looked away. Olivia walked back onto the stage. The room settled. "I owe you an honest explanation," she said. "Not a managed one, not a statement crafted by a communications team, an honest one." She talked for about 8 minutes. Nathan listened to all of it and watched the room's reaction as she spoke, the journalists leaning in phones, recording notepads moving. The investors with the gold-bordered lanyards exchanging looks that were harder to read. She told them about the vulnerability, specifically without softening it. She told them about Marcus Webb's attempts to escalate the concern through internal channels and the failure of those attempts. She told them about Nathan. Not dramatically, not with embellishment, just the facts. An independent security architect named Nathan Brooks had identified a critical authentication flaw, had attempted twice to communicate it to the technical team. On site, had been dismissed both times, and had ultimately demonstrated the vulnerability in the only way that guaranteed it would be taken seriously. That demonstration was disruptive, she said. It was alarming. It was, in the view of some people in this room, unauthorized. But it was also the reason that an active external intrusion attempt, which began during this demonstration and continued for 41 minutes afterward, did not result in a breach. She paused. "I want to be direct about something. The reason Nathan Brooks was not listened to when he first raised this concern has nothing to do with the quality of his analysis. It has to do with assumptions my team made based on how he was dressed, what he was carrying, and the fact that he didn't have a title from our company printed on his badge. Those assumptions were wrong. I am responsible for the culture that made those assumptions feel acceptable. And that is going to change." Biboom. Bene. The room was very quiet. Kyle, beside Nathan at the wall, was looking at the floor. Nathan was looking at the stage. He'd heard apologies before. Corporate apologies, personal ones, the kind that were genuine and the kind that were performance. He'd learned over the years to listen for the specific frequency of the real ones, the place in the voice where the script ran out and something unscripted took its place. He'd been listening for it since Olivia started talking. He heard it. Right at the end, before she moved on to the technical next steps. A brief hesitation, almost imperceptible, where what she said next was something she'd decided rather than something she'd prepared. That was real enough for him. He slipped out of the hall before the applause started. He found a quiet corner near the conference center entrance, sat down on a bench, and opened his phone. Subtle. There was a text from Lily's teacher, a photo of Lily at a table bent over a drawing. Her tongue slightly out the way she got when she was concentrating hard. The caption said, "Lily made something for you today. Says you have to have it the second you arrive." Nathan looked at the photo for a long time. He could feel the weight of the morning settling into his shoulders in the way physical things never quite captured, but emotional ones always did, the specific exhaustion of having cared intensely about something for several hours, of having pushed against resistance repeatedly, of having been right in ways that cost something before they gave anything back. He thought about Susan. He thought about her, the way he thought about her on days like this. Not with grief exactly, because grief had gradually transformed over 6 years into something more complicated and more livable. Something closer to a permanent ache that you learn to carry. The way you learn to carry anything heavy, by adjusting your balance and not pretending the weight wasn't there. He thought about what she would have said about this morning. He could hear her voice clearly, which was one of the things he was grateful he hadn't lost. You couldn't just let it go, could you? Not a criticism. Just recognition. She'd always known him that way, someone constitutionally incapable of walking past a fire without reaching for the nearest bucket, regardless of whether the building belonged to him. And he put the phone in his pocket and leaned his head back against the wall. That was where Marcus Webb found him. Marcus had gotten out of his internal briefing 20 minutes ago and had been looking for Nathan since. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a beard going gray at the edges, and the look of a man who had been anxious for several hours and was in the process of rearranging that anxiety into something else, now that the immediate crisis had passed. "Nathan?" He sat down on the bench beside him. "Tell me everything." Nathan told him. All of it, from the moment he'd arrived to the end of Olivia's statement in the main hall. He kept it factual, chronological, without editorializing. Marcus listened without interrupting, which was a quality Nathan had always respected in him. When Nathan finished, Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "She found the provenance documentation." "Yes, and she knows you built the base framework." "She knows." Marcus exhaled slowly. "I didn't tell her. I want you to know that. I didn't bring you here to, I wasn't trying to engineer some kind of—" "I know," Nathan said. "You brought me here because there was a real problem that needed to be addressed. That's what happened. But the rest of it is what it is." Nathan looked at him. "Why didn't you tell me, Marcus, when you first sent me the architecture documentation? You had to have seen it." Marcus met his gaze. "Because I knew if I told you that the platform was built on your work, you might not come. You'd think I was trying to make it personal. You'd think I had an agenda." Nathan considered that for a moment. That's probably true. And the vulnerability was real. The vulnerability was real, Nathan agreed. You made the right call. Did I? Marcus looked at the floor. 8 days of trying to get the internal team to listen. 8 days. And I still couldn't. He stopped. If you hadn't been here today, if the external attacker had gotten that window, the exposure wouldn't have stayed inside Bennett Dynamics. You know that. I know. The dependency chain on that auth framework goes into... I know, Marcus. Another silence. What happens now? Marcus said. Nathan glanced at his phone. 1:47 p.m. Now I go pick up my daughter. Marcus looked at him. Nathan, that's the answer. That's what happens now. Nathan stood up, picked up his bag, and settled the strap on his shoulder. The system is secure. Priya's got the documentation. Olivia is dealing with the public side of it. Whatever comes next, the legal questions, the attribution stuff, that'll get sorted in time. But right now, Lily is going to walk out of that school in 73 minutes, and she's going to look for me, and I am going to be there. Marcus stood too. He looked at Nathan with an expression that was a long way from the careful professional distance engineers usually kept with each other, something more complicated, more personal. You know she's going to offer you something, Marcus said. Olivia, a position, money, something. Probably. What are you going to say? Nathan thought about it for a genuine moment, not performing consideration, but actually weighing something. He thought about the apartment in Queens, the neighborhood repair shop, where he picked up contract work 2 afternoons a week, the satisfying smallness of a life built to fit around what mattered most. He thought about the drawing in his laptop bag, the house with the tree, the 2 figures standing under it. I'm going to say what I need to say, he said. When she says it. That's not an answer. Sure it is. He put his hand briefly on Marcus's shoulder. You did the right thing, getting me here. I know that cost you something internally. Marcus shook his head. It didn't cost me anything. It'll cost you something later, when people figure out you went around the official channels. Then it costs me something later. Some things are worth it. Nathan nodded. He picked up his bag more firmly, the way you pick something up when you're about to walk out a door and mean it. He looked at Marcus for a moment, this man who had trusted him enough to call him in, who had cared enough about the right outcome to risk the professionally comfortable one. Thank you, Nathan said, for trusting me. Marcus said always. Nathan walked toward the exit. He was almost at the door when he heard his name again. He turned. Olivia Bennett was standing 20 feet behind him in the lobby, still wearing the stage blazer, looking at him the way someone looks when they've been calculating something and have finally arrived at a number they're willing to say out loud. I just wanted to say, she started. I have to pick up my daughter, Nathan said. I know. I'll be brief. She walked toward him, stopped at a conversational distance. I'm going to send you something tonight, a formal proposal. I want you to read it before you decide anything. That's all I'm asking. Read it before you say no. Who says I'm going to say no? She smiled, a different kind of smile than the one she'd had on the stage. Smaller, more real. You're going to say no to whatever the first version is. That's fine. I'm prepared to have a conversation. Nathan studied her for a moment. You're better at this than you were at 9:45 this morning. I've had a very educational day. So have I. She extended her hand. He shook it. One thing, he said. Name it. Marcus Webb. Whatever internal consequences he's facing for going around proper channels to get me here, I want that addressed. Already done. She said it without hesitation, which meant she'd already thought about it, which meant she was further along in processing this morning than her expression gave away. Marcus is being recognized, not reprimanded. Nathan held her gaze for a moment longer. Then he said, Okay. He walked out of the Meridian Convention Center into the afternoon. The city was loud and indifferent the way New York always was, moving at its own pace with no particular interest in the morning he'd had. He walked to the parking garage, found his car, put his bag in the passenger seat, and sat behind the wheel for 30 seconds before starting the engine. He reached into the front pocket of his laptop bag. The drawing was still there, folded carefully, slightly worn at the crease, a house and a tree, and 2 people standing under it in crayon. He held it for a moment. Then he started the car and drove toward Queens. Lily was the 7th kid out the door. Nathan was standing at the edge of the pickup area, hands in his jacket pockets, watching the school entrance. The way he always watched it, with the particular attentiveness of a parent who has learned that the first 3 seconds after a child appears tell you everything about how their day went. Lily came through the door in a rush backpack, bouncing, and scanned the line of waiting adults with the serious, methodical focus she'd had since she was old enough to look for things. When she found him, her whole face changed. She ran. He crouched down and caught her, and she hit him with enough force that a less prepared man would have gone over backward. She wrapped both arms around his neck and held on. "You came," she said into his shoulder. "I always come," he said. She pulled back and looked at him. That searching look that reminded him so much of Susan. It required a specific internal effort to receive it without flinching. She was looking for something in his face the way she sometimes did after the harder days, reading him with an accuracy that 6-year-olds were not supposed to have, and that Lily had possessed since she was approximately 3. "You had a hard day," she said. It wasn't a question. "Complicated day," he said. "But it ended right." She considered this for a moment, apparently decided it was acceptable, and then reached into her backpack and produced a folded piece of paper with the ceremony of someone presenting a legal document. "I made you something," she said. "Mrs. Patterson said it was very good." He took it, unfolded it carefully. It was a drawing, crayon, the determined crayon pressure of a 6-year-old who meant what she drew. A figure at a desk with a laptop, the laptop colored gray with a careful crack drawn across the lid, and beside the desk, a smaller figure with yellow hair and a red dress. Above the desk, in Lily's large, earnest handwriting, "My dad fixes things." Nathan looked at it for a long time. "It's perfect," he said. "I know," she said with the total absence of false modesty that he loved about her. He folded it and put it in his jacket pocket close to the other one. Then he stood up and took her hand, and they walked to the car. He read Olivia's proposal that night after Lily was in bed. He'd expected something corporate, a formal document with letterhead and carefully structured clauses, the kind of offer that communicated value while simultaneously hedging it. What she sent was different. It was 3 pages simply formatted, written in something close to plain language, and the first paragraph was not about the position, or the compensation, or the opportunity. It was an acknowledgement, specifically of the 2018 contract work, the token validation architecture, and the context hierarchy framework. She'd had her legal team run the provenance trace that afternoon, and they had confirmed what the documentation showed, that the foundational layer of Bennett Dynamics' authentication system had been designed by Nathan under a contract that transferred ownership without attribution rights, which was standard language, but, as Olivia put it in language that was clearly her own, rather than her legal team's, was standard in the same way that a lot of things in this industry are standard, which is to say, it was legal, and it was convenient, and it was not right. She wasn't offering him ownership. She couldn't undo 6 years of development and acquisition and architectural evolution. But she was offering attribution, a formal public acknowledgement in the platform's technical documentation and in the company's public-facing materials. And she was offering compensation that she described as a retroactive consulting credit for foundational design work, structured as a one-time payment that her legal team had calculated based on the current valuation of the platform. The number on page 2 made Nathan sit very still for a moment. Then he kept reading. The position she was proposing was Chief Security Architect, full-time with a direct reporting line to her. His mandate would be threefold: a complete security audit of the existing platform infrastructure, the design of a new internal vulnerability reporting framework that guaranteed escalation pathways couldn't be blocked at the team level, and the development of what she called a culture of epistemic humility in the engineering organization. Her phrase, which he suspected she'd spent some time arriving at. The compensation was generous. The equity component was real. The flexibility provisions were listed explicitly and without the usual corporate hedging school pickups. Family obligations, the kind of schedule that a single father with a 6-year-old actually needed. Not the theoretical flexibility that existed in employee handbooks and disappeared in practice. At the bottom of the 3rd page, she had written again in what was clearly her own voice rather than a lawyer's. "I am not offering you this because I feel guilty, though I do." I am offering you this because the company needs what you know, and because the company needs to become something different than what it has been. Those are two separate reasons, and both of them are true. Nathan put the document on the kitchen table. He got up and poured himself a glass of water and stood at the kitchen window for a while, looking at the lights of Queens, listening to the muffled city sounds that had been the backdrop of his life for 6 years. He thought about what he wanted to say. He thought about what he actually wanted. Those were not always the same conversation, and he was honest enough with himself to know it. He called Marcus at 9:15. "Did you read it?" Marcus said by way of answering. "How did you know she was going to send it tonight?" "Because I know her. When she makes a decision, she moves." "What did you think?" "I think it's a serious offer." "It is." "I think she wrote it herself. The key parts." "She did. She called me this afternoon and asked me 2 questions: what you needed professionally and what you needed personally. I told her what I knew." Nathan absorbed that. "What did you tell her?" "Professionally, that you needed to be heard. That you needed to be in an environment where the work mattered more than the politics, and where you weren't going to be talked over by people with better-looking equipment." A pause. "Personally, I told her you needed to be home by 3. Nathan was quiet. "Nathan, I'm here." "What?" "You've been doing contract work in a repair shop in Queens for 4 years. You've been patching together a living out of pieces and doing it well and taking care of Lily and not complaining about any of it. I know that. I've watched it." Marcus's voice was careful the way it got when he was saying something he'd thought about for a long time. "This isn't charity. You know that. This is someone finally seeing what you're worth and acting accordingly." "You're not wrong," Nathan said. "But, no but, I need to sit with it." "Okay, sit with it. How long?" "A few days. She'll give you a week. I already told her to expect that." Despite everything, Nathan almost smiled. "You told her to expect that." "I know you. You don't make fast decisions about important things. It's one of your best qualities, and occasionally a deeply frustrating one." "Thanks, Marcus. Call me when you decide." He sat with it for 3 days. On the first day, he took Lily to the park after school and pushed her on the swings for 45 minutes while she narrated an elaborate story about a horse who could fly but chose not to because flying was for showing off and horses had more dignity than that. He listened to all of it and asked follow-up questions and thought about almost nothing else. On the second day, he did his Tuesday afternoon at the repair shop, diagnosing network issues for a restaurant owner whose point-of-sale system had been throwing errors and helping an elderly woman named Dorothy get her email working again after she'd accidentally changed a setting she couldn't identify. He'd been coming to this shop for 3 years working for the owner, a retired electrician named Gerald, who had pivoted into computer repair in his 60s and had more practical diagnostic sense than half the credentialed engineers Nathan had worked with in his career. Gerald didn't ask him about the conference or the news. If Gerald had seen anything, he was keeping it to himself, which was typical of Gerald. At the end of the afternoon, Gerald came and stood in the doorway of the back room while Nathan was putting on his jacket. "Heard your name on the radio this morning," Gerald said. Nathan looked at him. "Business news. Something about the Tech Forward conference. Security thing." Gerald was quiet for a moment. "Said an independent consultant identified a major vulnerability. Saved some big company from a breach. Didn't use your last name, but they described you well enough." "What did they say?" "Said a single father with an old laptop did what a whole security team couldn't." Gerald paused. "Said the CEO admitted her people didn't listen to him because of how he looked." Nathan finished buttoning his jacket. "That cover it?" Gerald asked. "Pretty much." Gerald nodded once slowly in the way of a man who has seen enough of the world to not be surprised by it, but still has opinions about it. "You gonna take whatever she offered you?" "Still thinking." "What's to think about?" "Lily's school is 3 blocks from here," Nathan said. The repair shop is 2 blocks. I pick her up. I come here 2 afternoons a week. We walk home. It works. There are schools 3 blocks from other places, Gerald said. I know. And she didn't say you had to move. Nathan looked at him. You read the proposal. I didn't read anything. I'm inferring. Gerald crossed his arms. You think I can't tell when a man is finding reasons to stay still? Nathan was quiet. The question isn't whether it works, Gerald said. The question is whether something better is being offered. It's more complicated than that. Is it? Nathan picked up his bag. I'll see you Thursday, Gerald. I'll be here, Gerald said. Same as always. On the 3rd day, Nathan drove Lily to school and then sat in the parked car outside for a few minutes after she'd gone in. He wasn't thinking about the offer anymore exactly. He'd been thinking about it for 3 days, and the thinking had done its work and arrived where thinking eventually arrives at a place that was less about analysis and more about something simpler and harder to articulate. He was thinking about Susan. Specifically, he was thinking about a conversation they'd had about a year before she got sick, an ordinary evening conversation, the kind that doesn't seem important when you're having it, and that you carry for the rest of your life afterward. They'd been talking about work, about the contract he was on at the time, and whether he should push for a more permanent role or stay independent, and Susan had said something that had landed in him and stayed. You're allowed to want more than survival, Nathan. You know that, right? He'd deflected it at the time, said something practical about the flexibility of contract work, about the nature of the industry. And she'd looked at him with those eyes and said, I'm not talking about the industry. He sat in the car, and he thought about Lily's drawing. My dad fixes things. He thought about what it meant to build a life that demonstrated something true, not just to survive, not just to manage, but to show his daughter by example what it looked like when a person was seen for what they were worth, and accepted that seeing without apology. He took out his phone and called Olivia Bennett. She answered on the 2nd ring. I have some conditions, Nathan said. A beat. Then, tell me. The vulnerability reporting framework, I want full authority over the design and implementation, not advisory, actual authority. If I say a concern gets escalated, it gets escalated regardless of where it comes from or what the person raising it looks like. Agreed. Matt. The cultural component, the epistemic humility piece as you called it. I want it built into the onboarding process, not just a training module that people forget in 2 weeks. I want it in the evaluation criteria for team leads and senior engineers. That's going to create some friction internally. I know. That's why it needs to be in the evaluation criteria. A pause. Agreed. Flexible schedule, non-negotiable. School pickups, sick days. Lily comes first. I will deliver the work. The work will be excellent, but the schedule is mine to manage. Already in the proposal. I want it restated in writing specifically, not buried in a general flexibility clause. Done. One more thing. Go ahead. Gerald Moss. He runs a computer repair shop in Woodside, Queens. He's been offering an informal tech support service to small businesses and elderly residents in the neighborhood for 6 years. I want Bennett Dynamics to fund a proper community tech support program through his shop. Equipment, staffing, whatever he needs to do it right. It's not a large ask relative to what you're offering me. Silence on the other end. Not a calculating silence, a surprised one. That's your last condition, Olivia said. That's my last condition. Can I ask why? Because he told me something true when I needed to hear it, Nathan said. And because the neighborhoods that don't get that kind of support are full of people like Dorothy, who just need someone to explain what a setting does without making her feel stupid for asking. Another silence, this one softer. I'll have the team reach out to him this week, she said. Thank you, Nathan. Her voice had shifted. Is that a yes? He looked through the windshield at the school entrance, now quiet after the morning rush. He thought about Lily, inside drawing and learning and becoming whoever she was going to be. He thought about the work that needed doing, not just at Bennett Dynamics, but in the larger world, where systems got built on top of other systems, and the people who understood the foundations got forgotten, and the vulnerabilities accumulated until someone with an old laptop and nothing to prove sat down and showed everyone the truth. "Yes," he said. "That's a yes." He heard something on the other end that he thought might have been Olivia Bennett, exhaling. Really exhaling, not the controlled micro-breath of a CEO managing optics, but the actual exhale of a person who has been holding something and has finally set it down. "I'll have the updated agreement to you by end of day," she said. "I'll read it tonight." "Your start date?" 2 weeks, Nathan said. "I have things to wrap up here." 2 weeks, she agreed. He ended the call. He sat in the quiet car for another moment. The street was doing what streets do, moving indifferent, carrying its own business forward, without particular interest in the decision he'd just made. He didn't feel the way he thought he might feel. Not triumphant, not relieved exactly. More like a man who has been walking a long distance and has just recognized the terrain around him and realized he knows where he is. He drove to the repair shop. Gerald was already in the back room when Nathan arrived, hunched over a desktop unit that had been brought in the day before with a failed power supply. He looked up, read Nathan's face. "You called her," Gerald said. "I called her." "And?" "I have some conditions of my own to give you," Nathan said. "Sit down when you have a minute." Gerald set down the screwdriver. "I've got a minute right now," he said. So, Nathan sat down across from him at the cluttered work table between the disassembled components and the coffee cups and the years of honest work that had made this small room a place where things got fixed rather than discarded, and he told Gerald what was coming. And Gerald, who had seen enough of the world to not be surprised by most of it, surprised Nathan entirely by saying nothing at all for a full 30 seconds, and then reaching across the table and putting his hand briefly on Nathan's arm with the simple, unself-conscious directness of a man who knew what mattered and wasn't embarrassed to show it. "Susan would have been proud," Gerald said. Nathan looked at the table. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I think she would have." Outside, the city continued its indifferent motion. Inside the shop, nothing moved for a moment except the dust in the afternoon light, and that was enough. The 2 weeks passed, the way important transitions always pass faster than expected, and heavier than anticipated each day, carrying the particular weight of a life being packed up and moved forward. Nathan told Lily on a Wednesday evening after dinner while she was coloring at the kitchen table. He sat down across from her and waited until she looked up, which she did, with the unhurried attention of a child who had learned that when her father sat down and waited, something worth hearing was coming. "I'm going to have a new job," he said, "starting next week." Lily put down the orange crayon. "At the conference place, close to it. I'm going to work for the company that had the conference." She considered this. "The one where all the screens turned red." He looked at her. "You heard about that." "Mrs. Patterson said something, and Tyler in my class said his dad saw it on the news." She picked up the crayon again, then put it back down. "Was that you, the screens?" "Yes." "Did you do it on purpose?" "Yes." She thought about this for a long moment with the seriousness she brought to things that mattered. Was it the right thing? "Yes," he said. "It was the right thing." She nodded once satisfied in a way that reminded him painfully and beautifully of her mother. Then she said, "Will you still pick me up at 3? "Every day," he said. "That's already been agreed." "Okay." She picked up the crayon. "Then it's good." Bye. He watched her go back to her drawing. The simplicity of it, the uncluttered directness of a 6-year-old's moral reasoning landed somewhere in his chest and stayed there. "Every day. That's already been agreed." "Okay, then it's good." If only the rest of the world worked that cleanly. But his last Thursday at the repair shop was quieter than usual. Gerald had spread the word in the neighborhood in the subtle way. Gerald spread everything, not announcing, just mentioning in the course of regular conversation, to the people who came in and out. By 2 in the afternoon, a small and unrehearsed collection of regulars had found reasons to stop by. Dorothy came in with a coffee cake wrapped in foil and placed it on the counter without comment. The restaurant owner, whose point-of-sale system Nathan had fixed, came by to say the system was still running clean. A retired postal worker named Frank, who came in every few weeks with increasingly creative ways to break his laptop, shook Nathan's hand and told him he'd done good without specifying what good thing he'd done, which Nathan understood was its own kind of respect. Gerald stood in the back room doorway, watching all of it. "You built something here," Gerald said when the last visitor had gone and they were closing up. "In this neighborhood, with these people. You know that." "You built it," Nathan said. "I just showed up. Same thing most of the time." Gerald was pulling on his jacket. "The program Olivia Bennett is funding, I want to do it right. I want to talk to some of the community organizations. Make sure we're actually reaching the people who need it, not just the ones who already know to ask." "That's exactly the right way to do it. I'll need some help setting up the technical side, the equipment, sourcing, the security considerations for the devices we're giving out." "I'll be 20 minutes away," Nathan said. "Call me." Gerald looked at him. "You know I've known you for 3 years. You came in here with Lily on a Saturday. She must have been 3 years old. And you asked if I had any contract work, because you were between clients and could use the income. And I said yes because you seemed competent, and I needed the help." He paused. "I never asked you much about what you'd done before, the big stuff. I figured you'd tell me if you wanted to." "I didn't want to," Nathan said. "I know, that's fine." Gerald locked the back room. "I'm just saying I always knew there was more there than what you showed. You can tell. Some people have depth that shows even when they're trying to be plain about it." Nathan picked up his bag. "I'll miss this place." "It's not going anywhere," Gerald said. "Neither are you really. You're just expanding the radius." His first day at Bennett Dynamics was a Monday, which felt appropriate, clean, unambiguous, the week's natural beginning. The company's New York office occupied 3 floors of a building in Midtown. Olivia met him in the lobby herself, which he hadn't expected, and which he could see from the slightly startled expressions of the 2 employees at the reception desk was not her standard practice. She was in the same understated expensive mode as the conference dark blazer minimal jewelry. But something in her bearing was different from that morning 2 weeks ago. Quieter. More deliberate. The performance register was lower. "Welcome," she said, and it was a straightforward word, delivered without the usual corporate ceremony that made straightforward words feel hollow. "Thank you," he said. She walked him through the building herself, rather than assigning someone to do it, which told him something about how she'd decided to set the tone for his arrival. The engineering floors were open plan, the way most tech companies went these days. And as they moved through, Nathan was aware of the particular quality of attention you get when people know who you are without having formally met you. Some of it was curiosity. Some of it was something more guarded, especially from the engineers who had been in the room on the conference day. People recalibrating, trying to figure out who this man actually was and what his presence here meant for them. He didn't perform for any of it. He just walked and listened to Olivia and paid attention to the building the way he always paid attention to unfamiliar systems, looking for the structure underneath the surface. They ended up in a corner conference room that Olivia told him was his, which meant it had a door and a window and a whiteboard, which was all he needed. "Priya is going to be your primary point of contact on the infrastructure side," Olivia said. "She requested it specifically." "I know. She emailed me last week." Olivia smiled. "She's been preparing. She has a list of questions about the original framework design that is currently 4 pages long." "Good. Those are the right questions. I want to schedule something with you this week, not a formal meeting, just a conversation, about the culture piece. Where you want to start, what you need from me, how you want to handle the resistance you're going to get from some of the team leads." "There will be resistance," Nathan said. It wasn't a question. There will be resistance, she agreed. Some people heard my statement at the conference and processed it as a one-time public admission, the kind of thing you say, and then move past. They're going to realize it isn't that. How much cover will you give me? As much as you need. That's not a polite answer. It's the actual answer. I will back your calls. If someone pushes back to me directly and their pushback isn't substantive, I'll redirect them to you. She paused. If their pushback is substantive, I'll bring it to you directly and we'll work through it together. Nathan nodded. That's the right approach. I've been known to have them occasionally. He looked at her. You're different than you were at the conference. I told you it was an educational day. I mean structurally different, not just the apology, something in how you're operating. She was quiet for a moment. I spent the weekend doing something I don't often do, she said. I asked my senior team to tell me something I was wrong about, not what I should improve, what I was actually wrong about. She looked at the whiteboard. It was an uncomfortable 3 hours. What did you learn? That I had built a company where being right publicly mattered more than being right privately, where the admission of a mistake was treated as a vulnerability to be managed rather than a correction to be made. A beat. Sound familiar? It's common, Nathan said. It's not unique to you. That doesn't make it acceptable. No, he agreed. It doesn't. The first month was dense with work, the kind of sustained, detailed problem-solving work that Nathan had always done best and that the company badly needed. He spent the first 2 weeks conducting what he called the real audit, which was distinct from the technical audit Priya had done in the immediate aftermath of the conference. The technical audit had found the vulnerabilities in the code. What Nathan was doing now was finding the vulnerabilities in the people and the processes, the places where important information stopped moving, where assumptions calcified into policy, where the organizational structure had inadvertently built walls between the people who saw problems and the people with the authority to fix them. This day, he interviewed 31 people in those 2 weeks. Engineers, team leads, project managers, 2 members of the executive team. He asked the same questions to everyone. Tell me about a time you identified a concern and weren't sure if you could raise it. Tell me what made you uncertain. Tell me what happened when you did or didn't raise it. The answers were illuminating and in some cases difficult to hear. He wrote them up not as an indictment but as a map. Here is where the system is healthy. Here is where it is not. Here is what the data suggests about why. He presented it to Olivia in the corner conference room on a Thursday afternoon, the 2 of them at the table with printed copies of the report and a whiteboard full of his shorthand. She read it slowly and carefully the way she read everything he'd seen her read. She didn't interrupt or ask questions until she'd finished. Then she put the report flat on the table and looked at it for a moment. Kyle, she said. His section. He was honest, Nathan said. I want to be clear about that. He didn't know me, and he made a judgment call based on incomplete information. That's human. The problem isn't Kyle specifically. The problem is that the culture made his judgment feel safe. Correct. The judgment didn't feel risky to make. There was no internal signal that told him dismissing an outside concern without checking it first had any cost. So he defaulted to the path of least friction. How do you fix that? You change the cost calculation. Not through punishment. Punishment makes people cautious and deceptive. You change it by demonstrating consistently over time that the people who raise legitimate concerns get heard, and the people who dismiss them without investigation have to explain why. He paused. And you change it by making curiosity a valued behavior, not just tolerance of outside perspectives, active curiosity. Kyle should have been curious about what I was seeing. He wasn't. That's the gap. Olivia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I laughed at your laptop. We've been over that. I know. I keep coming back to it. She looked at him. It wasn't a small thing. I did it in public. I did it for the audience. It was the instinct of someone who had become so accustomed to equating appearance with competence that the instinct operated faster than the judgment. Yes. How do you stop that? You practice the opposite until the opposite becomes the instinct. He looked at her steadily. You've been doing it. In the week since the conference, you've been doing it. I've watched you in the meetings we've been in together. You ask questions before you form assessments. You don't perform confidence you don't have. That's practice. It's exhausting, she said, not complaining, just honest. Yes, he said. Staying curious is harder than deciding you already know. That's why most people stop doing it. Wow. The vulnerability reporting framework launched 6 weeks after Nathan started. It wasn't complicated in its design. The most important systems rarely are. Any employee at any level could submit a security or integrity concern through a dedicated channel that routed directly to Nathan's team, bypassed the standard management chain, and required a documented response within 48 hours. The response didn't have to be agreement. It had to be genuine engagement evidence that the concern had been looked at by qualified eyes and evaluated on its merits. The first month they received 23 submissions. 14 were valid technical concerns of varying severity. 3 were significant enough to require immediate remediation. The remaining 9 were either misunderstandings or edge cases that required explanation rather than action. But every one of them received a response that treated the person raising it as someone whose observation mattered. Word traveled fast in engineering organizations. By the second month, the submission volume doubled. Priya came to Nathan's office on a Tuesday morning in the 6th week, carrying her laptop and a coffee and the 4-page question list about the original framework design, which was now 7 pages because she'd added to it after their first 2 sessions. I want to show you something, she said. She opened her laptop and turned it toward him. It was a design document, a proposed modification to the context hierarchy framework that addressed 3 of the legacy assumptions Nathan had identified in their earlier conversations, updating the architecture for modern commercial applications without sacrificing the structural integrity of the original design. He read through it. It was good work. More than good, it was the kind of structural thinking that took real understanding, not just technical facility. She had internalized the original design logic deeply enough to know where it could bend without breaking. This is strong, he said. I've been working on it for 2 weeks. I wanted to get it right before I showed you. What's your timeline for implementation? What's your Q2 with your approval? It'll need a full test environment run before it touches production. Of course. He handed the laptop back. One thing. Section 4, the inheritance resolution logic. The way you've written it here under high-load conditions, there's a potential race condition between the resolution process and the token refresh cycle. She took the laptop, looked at Section 4, and frowned. Read it again. You're right, she said. I need to add a mutex lock there. It's a small thing. The rest of it is excellent. She closed the laptop, looked at him with the directness she'd had since that first day in the operations room. Can I ask you something? Sure. When you designed the original framework in 2018, did you know someone was going to build something like this on top of it? Nathan thought about it honestly. I knew it was the kind of foundation that could support something larger. I designed it to be extensible. That was part of the brief. I didn't know specifically, but I knew the architecture had range. Did you mind? When you found out at the conference how far it had gone, how much had been built on it without attribution? He was quiet for a moment. For a long time, he said. I didn't think about it much. The work was done. It was paid for. It had become part of something else. That's how this industry goes. You accept it, or you spend your career bitter about it. And now I'm here, which is its own kind of answer. She nodded slowly. I'm glad you're here, she said. Not just because of the security work, because of how the place feels different, because people are raising their hands now. Because Kyle is actually one of the best people sending in reports through the new framework he's submitted. 5 concerns in the last month, all of them legitimate, all of them well documented. She paused. Because the place is starting to feel like somewhere that wants to be better, rather than just appear better. Nathan looked at her. That's the work, he said. That's all of it right there. 3 months after the conference, Olivia stood up at an all-hands meeting and did something that was not in any communications playbook Nathan had ever encountered. She thanked Marcus Webb by name, publicly, in front of the entire company. She described the 8 days he had spent trying to escalate a legitimate concern through internal channels and the 8 days during which the internal channels had failed him. She described what his persistence had ultimately made possible, not just the prevention of a breach, but the beginning of something the company needed to become. She told the assembled employees that Marcus's behavior was the model, not the exception, and that the organization they were building going forward was one that rewarded exactly that kind of principled persistence. Marcus was standing near the back of the room. Nathan watched him from across the space, watched the particular quiet way Marcus received the acknowledgement. Not with surprise, not with performance, just with the steady, contained expression of someone who has been right about something for a long time and is finally watching the record catch up. Afterward in the hallway, Marcus found Nathan. "How'd she do?" Marcus said. "She meant it," Nathan said. "That's the only thing that matters." "It is," Marcus agreed. They stood in the hallway for a moment, the noise of the dispersing all hands around them. "You know what I keep thinking about," Marcus said. "The morning of the conference. You'd been up until 2 the night before going through the documentation. You dropped Lily at school. You drove into Manhattan. You showed up with that laptop. It's a good laptop. It is a good laptop." Marcus smiled. "And you knew. You knew who had built what, and you knew nobody in that room was going to look at you and assume you were the person who'd built it. And you came anyway." The work needed doing. "Nathan." Marcus looked at him directly. "I'm not talking about the work. I'm talking about you. About what it costs to keep showing up in rooms that have decided what you are before you open your mouth. And you kept showing up anyway, for years." Nathan was quiet. "I just want you to know," Marcus said, "that I see that. What it cost. What it keeps costing." A pause. "And what it built." Nathan looked at the floor for a moment, then up. "Buy me lunch," he said. Marcus laughed a real laugh, the uncalculated kind. Yeah, I will." On a Friday evening in late November, Nathan sat in Gerald's repair shop while Lily drew pictures at the work table beside him, her tongue slightly out her focus total. Gerald had gone to a community meeting, the third planning session for the Neighborhood Tech Support Program, which was taking shape with the particular momentum of a thing being done by people who genuinely believed in it, rather than people who had been assigned to it. The shop was quiet in the way it got on Friday evenings. The city moved outside. The light was going flat and golden through the front window. Lily looked up from her drawing without warning and said, "Dad?" "Yeah." "Are you happy?" He looked at her. The question landed with the full, undefended weight of a 6-year-old's directness. No preamble, no softening. Just the question asked because she wanted to know. He thought about the morning 3 months ago, standing at the back of a convention hall with a scratched laptop and a promise to keep watching a system log for a flaw that everyone with a better-looking badge had already decided wasn't there. He thought about Susan saying, "You're allowed to want more than survival." He thought about Gerald's hand on his arm and the drawing in his jacket pocket, and Marcus laughing in a hallway, and Priya's 7-page question list, and a 6-year-old who drew her father at a desk with the words, "My dad fixes things," in large, serious crayon letters. He thought about what it meant to be seen, not performed at, not assessed and dismissed, but genuinely seen after years of carrying what you knew through rooms that had already decided you carried nothing worth having. "Yes," he said, "I'm happy." Lily studied him for a moment with her mother's eyes, reading the answer the way she read everything carefully, thoroughly, looking for the thing underneath the surface. Whatever she found there seemed to satisfy her. She gave him one small, decisive nod. Then she looked back down at her drawing and kept coloring. And that was enough, more than enough. The whole complicated, costly, hard-earned truth of a life that had finally arrived at the place where what was real and what was visible had become at last the same thing. That truth was contained entirely in a 6-year-old's nod, in the quiet of a small shop at the end of a Friday, in the sound of a crayon moving across paper, while the city rolled on outside, indifferent as always, and no longer able to touch him. Some things cannot be taken from you once you have built them properly. Nathan Brooks had learned that the hard way over years and losses and rooms full of people who looked right through him, and he had built something properly. He had built it quietly, thoroughly from the foundation up. And it would hold.